Dante is next author of the Divine Comedy. He's also a poet. He's a late medieval writer. Dante, the Divine Comedy has three parts. The most famous of them is the Inferno, Dante's Inferno. And Dante shows the sort of shifts that are going on in the late Middle Ages. Dante has, in the Divine Comedy, he has the story is basically Virgil, a Roman author, a Roman writer, is taking Dante, the author, on this journey through heaven and hell. And so this shows this interest in the classics of Greece and Rome. Secondly, we see the Dante writes in the vernacular, so he writes in the Italian language. Interest in that. The Inferno does represent medieval literature because it's about theology. It still is definitely focused on Christian theology. But Dante begins to look at different characters, the ideas, the emotions, the behaviors of these different actors, and discussing their consequences in the afterlife. So basically the Inferno looks at all these people that have sinned and are now explaining their sins and, despondent because they're in hell. And so this is the beginning of sort of examining characters. And this will become a hallmark of Renaissance humanism, is studying human emotions, human behaviors, human predilections, human thoughts. And so we see that, this Dante's writing is not like other medieval yarns, which are sort of tales of legends and heroes going overseas, or Beowulf conquering and defeating Grendel. But this is a beginning to look at characters and trying to study them as human beings. So the Black Death is happening around the same time. The Black Death is obviously this tumultuous period where about a third of the people of Europe die. The effects of this are what's important. The Black Death, it results in an upheaval in society. Religious authorities are questioned because of so much destruction. People wonder if there's the wrath of God coming down on Europe. Some people begin to reject Christian teachings because they say it makes no difference. Groups begin to, do different things. For example, the flagellants are a group of people that walk around basically beating themselves up, rid themselves of sin, to try to repent from the sins that are causing such great destruction. So it challenges religious authority, and other things will as well. Secondly, it's also challenging the societal order. Okay, as a result of so many people dying, so many people fleeing, the old feudal obligations are going to be changed. Many peasants will move to towns afterwards and find new jobs that are now available because those townspeople died. Many landed elites, many of these squires and knights that have these lands, will now have to look for more peasants to replace those that died, to replace those that fled. And those peasants will not accept serfdom. And so in the aftermath of the Black Death, we see virtually the end of serfdom in Western Europe. Boccaccio's The Decameron, Boccaccio is an author, The Decameron is his work. It's another book in the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, like Dante. And basically this is happening during the Black Death. He's got a group of characters sitting around telling stories. And these stories are about their lives and about their interests. Some of these stories are lewd, many comedic, all very personal. And so they show that interest in human thoughts and human emotions and human predilections, the human character, what it means to be human. And so likewise, it's another precursor to the Renaissance. Okay, now let's continue to talk about the religious upheaval that happens in the aftermath of the Black Death. we have the Great Schism. This Great Schism is in the it's in the 1400s, I think, or the late 1300s into the 1400s. And this schism is when there's multiple popes. Okay, if you remember, the Pope moved to Avignon. Avignon is just outside the territory of the King of France. And so the Pope moves there, and this is a period known as the Babylonian captivity, which is on your study guide. The Babylonian captivity refers to this period in which the Pope is based in Avignon. The reason why it has that name is because for opponents of the French king saw that the Pope was now basically controlled by the French king and enslaved by the French king, similar to how the Israelites were enslaved by the Babylonians in the Old Testament. So that's where the name comes from. So many people who are not French felt like this was bad. The Pope was now under the control of France. And so, at some point, there are two popes that are elected. That's the schism between these two popes, one in Rome, one in France, in Avignon. And then later, a Council of Pisa comes together to try to rectify that situation. And then there's three popes, another pope's elected, and so now there's three popes, each claiming to be the righteous heir to the Bishop of Rome, to the Papacy. And so finally, a council called the Council of Constance gets all three popes to step down and ends the schism. Now, in the aftermath of this, we have competition between the councils and the Renaissance, and the popes. This is called the conciliar movement. The conciliar movement is a movement by church councils to be the head of the church, not the pope. So there's tensions between the councils that meet and the pope who's now in charge. And ultimately the pope emerges victorious in this question of who is the head of the church. This will actually have long-term implications. This will ensure that the Catholic Church will have a single head and will help prevent it from completely collapsing during the Protestant Reformation. Some historians think that had the conciliar movement won out, the councils would have been very divided over the question of Protestantism and perhaps divided along ethnic or regional lines, and therefore the church might have been severely weakened and even more divided in the aftermath. Okay, Wycliff and Huss are the last two here under the Middle Ages. They're in the late Middle Ages, and they're church reformers. Wycliff is in England, and Wycliff begins to question whether the church is necessary for salvation. He, for example, suggests that sacraments and other acts, participation in the church as an institution, is not necessary, and instead that individual prayer and individual good behavior is what's necessary for salvation. John Huss is a Bohemian Christian reformer who also is inspired by the ideas of Wycliffe and begins to question church practices. And he inspires many followers there. By the late Middle Ages, many church authorities were inspiring resentment from especially poor people. The sale of indulgences, for example, many saw it as abusive, or high fees for burials, and the lavish behavior of some church officials inspired some resentment. And so John Huss was a popular church reformer in Bohemia. Huss was, of course, condemned by the Council of Constance, the same council that ended the Great Schism, and he was condemned and executed by the Council of Constance. This will be important later on because that act by the Council of Constance will be proof enough for Martin Luther that church councils cannot be the final authority in Christian truth.